We are all on a ride with which we do not fully control. We can feel like we're on fire. We can feel like we're on ice. What do? How do we track where we really are? Into that, we've instilled North Star metrics that define where we are so that we don't have to listen to either one of these two sides and give them more weight than they deserve. And this is really common. Companies, Facebook, Dropbox, Twitter, Slack, all of them instituted North Star metrics so that their product teams could figure out exactly where they were, what they were doing to succeed, and whether or not they were fulfilling the values that they set out to derive for their customers.
I'm Mallory McLemore. Today I'm going to be talking to you about the entrepreneur as an explorer and how to move forward from learned fear. Fear is acquired in two ways. First, as a social means through stories and warnings. You may be afraid of something like sharks or snakes, but you really have no firsthand experience to back this up, but you still feel this. And second, our direct experiences of failure, or what I'm calling learned fear. The call to action for you all is ultimately, I don't believe that a pursuit with achievement of power only is enough, especially after experiencing failure and holding on to learned fear. But I believe that an entrepreneurial person can define their personal frontier, mine is aerospace, and that passion will follow. Without a real passion, moving forward as an entrepreneur is probably too hard. And so I want to challenge you to find your frontier, find your passion, and keep moving forward.
What does it take to be a founder, and how can I assess myself against those traits to get a better sense of whether I quote unquote have what it takes? So the real question is not what makes founders rational, but what makes founders distinctly irrational compared to other humans. For any of you aspiring entrepreneurs out there who feel that you don't necessarily have the right neuropsychology or don't have the right appetite for risk, you can actually train your brain to fix this.
Hi, my name is Timmy Galloway. So, how should we think about starting a company with friends? Of course, there are advantages here. We know that. Friendship is often built upon a foundation of aligned interests or a shared value system. Friendship can also bring an extensive history of trust and reliability that can be turned to during times of stress when starting a company. But what are the costs? One, friendships are often formed with people that are like you. Now, this can easily lead to a lack of diversity of thought and perhaps an even overlap in necessary skills. It's also easy to develop an overdependence on your friend or co-founder. One of the most important things about the dynamic of friendships in a startup is communication and trust. Friends should rely on one another to talk openly and honest about the possible negative outcomes and plan for these outcomes.
I remember one spring when my grandma came to visit, and I hated going to bed. So I'd come up with all sorts of excuses. My grandma would routinely mention, some rules are for everyone. That lesson has always stuck with me. The rules were the rules, and no one was above them. Today, as I look around the entrepreneurial community, the heights of it at least, I'm not entirely convinced that it's stuck with everyone. And perhaps that's not surprising. Over a decade ago, Silicon Valley, seeking desperately to be contrarian, started serving out the punchline, move fast and break things. And the entire entrepreneurial community, finding solace in collective edginess, got drunk on the mantra. I mean, the general theme of the last decade or two can be loosely defined as disruption at all costs. Fight the traditional model with a new, different model. Push the boundaries. Don't conform. Regulations are malleable. Laws are archaic. Disrupt first, question later, move fast, and break things. Today, I'm going to discuss why that psychology doesn't deserve the halo effect associated with it and suggest a new approach to entrepreneurship for the next generation. I'll outline firstly why the mentality is problematic because it puts entrepreneurs at risk at the benefit of VCs, as well as dangerous because it plays to our lizard brain, increasing the likelihood of irreparable mistakes. Then I'll suggest a path forward and outline why now is the time to marshal in a new era of entrepreneurship.
If you search online for topics that are not suitable for work, faith is always coming in at the top of that list. However, I believe that it's time to retire these norms and usher in a new paradigm where we allow people to be more authentic in the workplace and to bring their faith with them.
Consider for a moment the quest of Hercules, hero of ancient Greek mythology. Hercules' second labor was to slay the Lernaean Hydra, a many-headed beast. Imagine his amazement when for each head he severed, 2 more sprang up in the stump's place. Consider the anti-fragility of the Hydra. For any other creature, losing one's head is a death sentence. But paradoxically, when faced with every lethal blow, the Hydra got stronger and more powerful. This brings me to the topic of my talk today. Lebanese-American essayist, statistical mathematician, and former derivatives trader Nassim Taleb coined the phrase anti-fragile in his so-named 2012 book and defined it as follows. Some things benefit from shocks. They thrive and grow when exposed to volatility, randomness, disorder, and stressors. They love risk and uncertainty. Being anti-fragile is more than being resilient. A resilient system is able to withstand shocks. An anti-fragile system actually gets stronger, more effective, and higher performing when exposed to setbacks and adversity. I posit that anti-fragility is a principle all entrepreneurs should strive for, most especially as they scale.
I'm going to talk about quality versus quantity conundrum. Lots of people spend countless hours trying to start off with the perfect, only to not get started ever. People who are trying to go for the perfect thing right on the first try, they're handicapped by their extremely high expectations, which makes them afraid of failure and imperfection. Most of us have this tendency to try to go for perfection. Well, there's an argument to be made that maybe we would have a better time achieving great things if we give ourselves some leeway to do normal things, mediocre things, but keep iterating over it until we really achieve perfection.
Hi, are you curious about what it's like to start a company as an immigrant? In addition to the risks that all startup founders have to deal with, such as financial, market, and execution risks, immigrant entrepreneurs have an additional risk to worry about: immigration. While the US attracts many entrepreneurs to start a company here, it unfortunately does not have a straightforward path that immigrants can take to start a company. The paths that are available are fraught with uncertainty and put an additional source of stress on founders. Yosef Al-Banwavi, co-founder of Piliv, said that he didn't want to discuss the immigration issues he was dealing with his co-founder and team because he felt they were already under pressure. In addition to the stress, immigration also takes up a lot of additional resources. Suzanne Mitchke and Patrick Renner, co-founders of Citrus Labs, said that it requires a lot of time and money to logistically keep them in the US. The amount of money they're having to spend on their immigration lawyers just to be in the United States is, as they said, pretty insane. Once you accept that you will have these additional challenges, you need to have a plan on how to deal with them. For example, on the issue of immigration, consult with several attorneys, explore all paths, stay ahead of the game. Given that these processes take long, you have to think several steps ahead to make sure that what you're doing and your immigration status in the country are aligned and legal. Number 2, be upfront with your non-immigrant co-founders. If you have non-immigrant co-founders, you should let them know upfront about the issues you will be facing. They should understand that there will be an additional burden on you, not only from a time and energy perspective, but also an emotional perspective. Most importantly, they should be ready to be supportive and flexible. Number 3, focus on your main objectives. After reading advice of many immigrant founders, their number 1 advice is to focus on the primary goals of why you started a company. Focusing on the bigger picture helps them face and overcome obstacles.
Depression, anxiety, and mood disorders all actively work to undermine founder performance. They often contribute to burnout, co-founder conflicts, increased employee turnover, toxic company culture, and inability to hire top talent. According to Noam Wasserman at HBS, 65% of failed startups failed for avoidable reasons, like co-founder conflict. All these experiences are exacerbated when founders are in a time of high mental and emotional strain. So what can investors and founders do about founder mental health?
My name is Jonathan Falag, and I am here to talk to you about making quality decisions for disruptive startups.
As someone who identifies as an introvert, I've often questioned whether the founder's journey is the right one for me. Would investors make quick and incorrect judgments about me because of biases against introverted leaders in the workplace? There does appear to be evidence that links extroversion to the likelihood of pursuing entrepreneurial endeavors. The archetype of a founder has shifted over the past few decades as the celebrity CEO has become increasingly prominent, particularly here in the US. In his book, The Emergence of Charismatic Business Leadership, HBS professor Richard Tedlow argues that there has been a general shift from the CEO as a chief mechanic of the business, who often worked outside of the public gaze, to someone with a mixture of charm, guile, brilliance, and even cruelty. Taken on its surface, the outlook for an introverted founder does look quite bleak. There's actually a lot of promise for introverted founders. In fact, these founders can be just as successful as their extroverted counterparts. As an introverted founder, it is critical to surround yourself with a team who complements you well.
The year is 1915, so Ernest Shackleton, an Anglo-Irish explorer, is on a ship called Endurance on his way with a crew of 27 to Antarctica. The ship gets stuck in heavy ice, cannot move, and they wait for days. This was his third attempt. He'd failed twice before. He took a fourth attempt, and most of his crew joined him. I started with that story to talk about entrepreneurs at the center of wildly successful and wildly failed startups who employ storytelling, human emotion. Steve Jobs had once famously said that the most powerful person in the world is a storyteller. And the storyteller basically sets the visions, values, and agenda of an entire generation that is to come. This is essentially about human emotion. Washington University studied about 500 pitch videos on Kickstarter. Those who varied their emotional expressions had more success in meeting their goals and raising monies and the number of contributors.
Hi, my name is Varun Nagarajan. I'm here to talk to you today about goal setting, its dangers, with a special focus on entrepreneurship.
Let me start by asking you a question. What's the first word that comes to mind when you think of an entrepreneur? Think of a founder of a startup that became a unicorn, valued over $1 billion, the incredibly successful ones. Most people would say genius, passionate, well-connected, maybe even crazy. I'm here today to debunk this myth, or dare I say, this bias. I want to break this mythical archetype of what a successful startup founder is and shed light instead on what specific qualities investors look for when funding startups. Then I'll end by giving you some tactical suggestions for how to make sure you have those qualities before walking into the pitch meeting. Hubristic and charismatic entrepreneurs are more successful in sourcing capital since they are perceived as more trustworthy and passionate. But what does it really mean for the wannabe founders out there? All you need is presence.
Who in their right mind would dare to jump into the founder's journey? Turns out, it's all about purpose. Ask yourself, why do you want to start a company? Your reason to become a founder should not be money or self-worth. Then what? Well, we got to go back to purpose. For some of us, finding that mission is easier said than done. If you're on that boat, maybe this will help you. There's a word in Japanese, ikagai. It's a beautiful concept that means the intersection of four major components: what you love, what you're good at, what you can be paid for, and this is key, what the world needs from you. So if you're struggling to find your purpose, ask yourself these four questions.